I think if you're in this space, if you're in this value chain, it's important to believe a couple of things. The first is that in the future, I believe consumers, customers, meaning retailers and others, will embed sustainable considerations into their purchasing decisions, into their choices more tomorrow than they do today. Most of the data show that.
Swine it.
Hello there, I'm David Dayhoff with DSM Firmenich Animal Nutrition and Health, and this is our second episode in the special sustainability series of podcasts. With me today is Stewart Lindsay. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer of the Campbell Soup Company. So welcome, Stewart.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for being our guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners of what your role is at the Campbell Soup Company?
Happy to, yeah. So Stewart Lindsay, I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Campbell's, and I've been in the ag and food space for almost 25 years now. I started thinking about it and working on it when I worked at Edelman, the big global public relations and communications firm. And some of our clients were in the ag and food space. And then I joined a company called Bunge, which is one of the world's biggest grain traders, processors of soybeans and grains and oil seeds, and worked there for about 15 years. And I've also led the corporate engagement team at the Nature Conservancy, the big environmental group. And now I've been at Campbell for a little over 2.5 years. So that's my background.
No, that's great. And I'm really happy to have you on this guest because, as I mentioned to you before, these podcasts are really popular with a lot of people in the production agriculture side of the animal agriculture industry. So including but not limited to people who are veterinarians, animal nutritionists, live operations managers, other people, in what's called the allied industry, like DSM Firmenich, selling feed additives. And so we have a lot of discussions on these podcasts that are often about a lot of the finer points of production-related issues around animal agriculture. But I get a sense a lot of times that when I am speaking with customers or others, that there's kind of a disconnect sometimes between people working in the barn and the feed mill, so to speak, and then the people actually putting a branded food product on the shelf. And so I think that's a great opportunity for us to bring a little variety to some of the programming here and talk more about sustainability from the point of view of somebody at an important branded food company like you. So with that in mind, I think everybody knows what Campbell Soup is, but a lot of people may not actually be as familiar with the total portfolio of what the products are that you sell. So can you say a little bit more about the whole portfolio of Campbell Soup Company?
I kind of consider us a house of iconic brands, really. So everybody hopefully is familiar with the Campbell Soup that we've been making for so long. The iconic red and white can. But we also make a lot of other products. So in our meals and beverage unit division, we make Prego Italian sauce, Pacific Foods, which is an organic brand that makes a variety of broths and soups and other foods. We do paste salsa, V8, and we just brought Rayo's, the other Italian sauce and meals brand, into our stable earlier this year. And then we have a snacks business which owns Pepperidge Farm. So think breads, think Goldfish, think Milano cookies, and all those great cookies from Pepperidge Farm. We've got Cape Cod chips. We have kettle chips, Late July tortilla chips and snacks, and a host of other things, including Snyder's pretzels. So a lot of different brands covering both meals and beverages, and also a wide array of snack foods. So a great company. We've been in business for 155 years. In the United States, focused primarily in North America now. And it's a great place to work, and really proud of the products we make.
No, thank you. And I've got many of those products in my pantry downstairs from here now too. So
excellent.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit. You're the Chief Sustainability Officer, and many companies like yours have somebody with that title. And then a lot of companies that are consumer-facing brands are making sustainability commitments of different kinds. So can you talk a little bit about the commitments that you're making as a company?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of them. And so if you think about it, I tend to think, well, what are the types of things that the topics, the issues, the sustainability goals, and focus areas that are relevant to a food company? I think we cover almost all of them. So if you think just kind of a quick rundown, we have emissions reduction targets. We have targets looking to reduce the waste that we send to landfill. So we're trying to improve the circularity of and the upcycling of waste products that leave the factory or leave our distribution chain. We have water targets. We have targets to improve the proportion of key commodities that we buy in terms of bending those towards sustainable agricultural practices. We have responsible sourcing commitments that relate to really all the products we buy, and ensuring that we can have enhanced traceability of those products, that we know more about how they're made, where they're made, for human rights and other issues like that. And we have a variety of other kind of targets related to nutrition, related to packaging, trying to improve the recyclability, the compostability of our packaging. So if you think about the value chain, if you think about the way we operate our facilities, if you think about what the product is, how it's packaged, and what happens to it at the end of its life, those are all the things that we're focused on. I think sometimes sustainability, when you think about it, most people in the value chain are working on these things, and sometimes it feels like, well, we're all working on slightly different things. But in fact, I think it's all part of a larger set of themes. And most of what we're concerned about from this space, and I think most other food companies are concerned about, it's issues that we see developing in the marketplace or among key stakeholders, the investors, customers, employees even. And so I tend to think of it, and this really stems from my history, my background. I started working at Bunge, and I was really responsible for the enterprise level for communications, reputation management, supporting the CEO in that work. And it became clear to me pretty early on, and this is 20 plus years ago, that if we didn't handle as an enterprise, as a global public company, some of these sustainability topics, climate change, biodiversity, things of that nature, that I wouldn't really be doing my job as somebody who's trying to manage the brand, the reputation of this global enterprise. So I started to focus on those things and say, well, what can we do in these spaces? And that slowly over time became my job. And I still believe that if you're not fundamentally focused on these topics, that you're really missing both the opportunity to mitigate risk, but also just plain business opportunities. And so when people ask, well, why do you focus on these things?
That was going to be my question. Yeah. So why bother making these commitments? Like, who really cares?
So I come back to a few things and a few trends. And so I think if you're in this space, if you're in this value chain, it's important to believe a couple of things. The first is that in the future, I believe consumers, customers, meaning retailers and others, will embed sustainable considerations into their purchasing decisions, into their choices more tomorrow than they do today. Most of the data show that. And I know there are puts and takes where the data say it, but yet no one seems to be at the retail cash register paying explicitly for it, or there are gaps there. In some cases they do, some cases they don't. But I believe that those trends, they've all been heading in one direction for a long time. And I don't see anything both from a research perspective or even from a qualitative kind of perspective out in the marketplace that would say that those trends aren't continuing, right? And so the question would be, well, where do you intersect those trends in the best way for your business? And it may be more relevant to certain products than others, but I believe that's happening and will continue to happen. And the second thing is we see a repricing of environmental assets, right? Both from a risk perspective, where the cost of environmental challenges, heat days, flooding, et cetera, has an impact. And you see that kind of percolating through the insurance market, but also from an opportunity perspective where, there are new markets being created, as we all well know, in the ag and food value chain for carbon sequestration, for ecosystem services. You know that from your own history. So that's a trend that's happening too, right? Which means that markets are being changed, and you see repricing of things both from a carbon perspective, from a cost of carbon, but also, on the packaging side, there's legislation now about extended producer responsibility. This is all a repricing of things that formerly were externalized. And then when you layer on top of that data and you say, well, my gosh, you have AI, you've got the Internet of Things, you've got massive ability to both store, analyze data. All of these things have accelerating factors from the tech side. So put all those things together, and I think, those trends to me are very clear. And the challenge is then, and really the job, I think, of a chief sustainability officer in this space is, well, how do you translate that into more near-term considerations? What are the choices you make? And oftentimes the goals that we set, yes, they're informed by external demands, but they're also, tools to orient businesses and orient activities towards where these trends are going. There's not a perfect match. I don't want to overemphasize the granularity or the pure synchronization of it, but they're tools to manage trends. That's the way I think about it.
Swine feed can be contaminated with pathogens from ASF, PED, PRRS, and SVA. These pathogens can negatively impact health and performance. Now you can improve feed biosecurity with VVC Premix from DSM-Firmenich. VVC Premix can reduce pathogen concentration of feed and also improve gut functionality, weight gain, and feed efficiency. Safeguard your feed with VVC Premix. Learn more at dsm.com/VVC-Premix.
So to double back a little bit, you talked about some of the goals before, emissions, greenhouse gases, but also some other things around water or other social variables, et cetera. And your company is a company famous for soup, goldfish crackers, cookies, tomato sauce. So, here I am working on an animal ag podcast, so people who are concerned about, people that make coffee or that make crackers and cookies, like, why is it relevant to you actually to be talking to an audience of people that are in the, let's say, the beef and cheese and pork business?
Sure. Well, I would start with just maybe 3 words, which would be chicken noodle soup. So that might say it all. I don't know.
That's right.
I think we have protein of various types: chicken, pork, beef, seafood in the soups that we sell. If you think chunky is a lot of beef based soups in that line, in that brand. I just mentioned chicken noodle soup, but you think about there's a lot of cheese used in the production of goldfish. We sell a lot of broths and stocks. The Swanson brand is a Campbell brand, so all of the the chicken stocks, beef stocks that you can buy at the store, Pacific in the same area. So we have, and of course, Prego and Rayo's have meat sauces. So there's a very, very important ingredients to a lot of the products that we make. And when you stack all that together, it makes an impact on our scope 3 emissions, the emissions in our value chain. So things like we have to think about how they're produced and what type of policies are used in those productions, and also kind of thinking actively about, well, where are some of the levers that we can pull in collaboration with the animal ag chain to reduce emissions for the full value chain, because those redound to us. And then, of course, our can of soup is the scope 3 emissions of some of our big customers on the retail side, all of them really. And then they're asking us, well, how can we think about the product carbon footprint of a can of soup, and what can we do to reduce our scope 3 emissions? So you get that cascading effect, and so it's very important to us.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's something you're able to talk about or not, but even the degree to which, I off the top of my head, I don't necessarily put Campbell Soup Company in the category of sort of protein companies, but it turns out, like you said, the protein when you stack it all up is actually a a relatively big contributor. Have you been able to quantify that? Is it anything that you've published yet on the extent to which your footprint is driven by the animal proteins?
We've definitely quantified it, and we've done a lot of homework on, where kind of on a cost curve some of these reduction potentials exist. We've looked, deeply into some of the new technologies that are coming out, some of the market solutions that are coming out, and we have the intent to do more partnerships in those spaces, be it in dairy or in the, let's say, the meat protein side of things, to be done. But we're working on it. So we haven't published, let's say, a breakdown.
Got it.
But when you think about beef, when you think about pork, chicken, and cheese, they're all on the list of contributors to Scope 3 emissions that are evident and things that we're thinking and working on.
You talked about these trends around consumers, and while it's going to be more tomorrow than it is today, but there's a long trend that you don't see reversing. And you also mentioned investors as well. If you could try and explain a little bit more to people who are many steps back removed from where you sit, back raising animals, about what are kind of the really major forces that are going into the balance that you described to make between how much change that you make, but also that you have to start making changes.
I guess your question is kind of what are some of the factors that sit higher on the list. So it's really a mix of things, and it's changing and evolving fairly steadily, or consistently, I should say. So I don't think I could say, well, it's absolutely this above all others. But if you think about it, we have, and most folks in this value chain are working on the same challenges, right? We're all kind of looking at the same problem from different angles. And I think one of the great things about the ag and food industry is that it has been working on these in a lot of creative ways for many years. And so many of us have collaborated on platforms or in groups that have been working on this and trying to unpack a very challenging question for a long time. And so that's exciting, and I think beneficial. So I'm sure there are folks in the animal ag value chain who could teach me quite a bit about what some of the forces and factors are. So I have to speak with a certain degree of humility, but I would break it down as follows. Look, I mean,
Sure.
I think most folks would look, and I think that the data about companies' engagement on things like climate change is pretty clear, right? Most people say, well, look, this is an issue that's evolving quickly and in a fairly definitive way. There are risks that are surfacing that we have to grapple with from a supply chain resilience perspective, from an operational resilience perspective. But there's also, regulatory and transition risks that are happening, right? And so we have to tackle these problems. I think investors, broadly speaking, especially long-term investors, would say, well, there are future risks related to this. How are you governing these questions internally? How are you integrating them into the business? And customers are seeing, I think, and I'm not a marketing person, so I have to be clear about that. But in the discussions that we have with customers, they want to include more of this in the product offerings that they have, and the messages that they can make to their customers, whether it be consumers or other B2B customers. So it's kind of comes from all different directions. I think I emphasize the trends because there are still gaps between what the data say and what actions are in any given moment. But the challenge is, how do you lump all that into an existing marketplace that has its own pressures and needs and demands for margin, for volume growth, for et cetera. That's really the challenge. And in a lot of those cases, the questions are, they've yet to be answered. We're still exploring and experimenting with different approaches. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It actually helps me rephrase my question a little bit of a better way too, that a lot of times when I am out interacting, whether it's with our customers or I go to a lot of ag industry conferences or things like that, and I frequently get some version of a question from people that is something like, David, isn't this just a bunch of this sustainability stuff is kind of like PR fluff for the company or something like that, isn't it? How does this stuff really matter?
I mean, most decisions are going to have relation to costs and capex and all the other things that you have to consider.
Mhm.
And I think it's a fairly well known challenge in the sustainability space that sometimes the ROI on various sustainability ideas or programs is can be hard to pencil. Right? I think you see incentives on the climate side. Currently, the last few years have helped advance quite a bit of investment in decarbonizing manufacturing, advancing renewables, electrification of fleet. I think there's that's evidence that some of these things still need some support to help get ramped up, right? So there's no shortage of challenges, and there's no shortage of I think in any enterprise there are going to be competing interests for capital and for investment, right? Even among different types of projects. So, but I think that the challenge of all this is, and that's why kind of the role that I have is to also to look forward and say, okay, well, where do some of these things go? What are some of the pragmatic steps we can take to prepare ourselves for that? And sometimes that involves, managing stakeholders who have legitimate questions and concerns. Sometimes it means partnering with NGOs and others who can bring different solution sets that don't exist within companies to bear on a problem or a challenge. And sometimes it means, having to decide that, we can't do that, or it doesn't make sense for a company like us to tackle this problem. Right? It's not our core competency, and it's not really the neighborhood in which we live day to day.
You mentioned in your background too that you worked at the Nature Conservancy in the past, and I often get the sense that, certainly not among everybody, but among a decent number of people that I run into, that a lot of the NGOs are really just kind of out to get us. Like they want to end agriculture as we know it. And I have to try and say there are a few NGOs whose agenda is actually really wish that no animal ever died for any human purpose whatsoever. But that's not the case of all the different NGOs. Do you encounter that same, trying to navigate some of those same waters in your role?
Well, there are all kinds of groups out there for sure. But I think that the evolution of the last 15 years or so has really created a very robust and almost solidified type of partnership among business and what I would call, project or solutions-based NGOs. So, and those could be extremely beneficial and very pragmatic, and are really actually quite essential to unlocking some of the potential that are out there. So, if we want to see the development of, more robust markets for ecosystem services, for carbon sequestration, for sustainable agriculture, and the benefits thereof, right? And benefits that could accrue at many different parts of the value chain, from the feed producer to the rearer of an animal, or to a dairy operator, what have you. That's going to require a combination of science. It's going to require market mechanisms and business. It's going to require social agreement and support. It's going to require policy, and businesses can't do that by themselves. And I think what's interesting about NGOs, and what I certainly saw when I worked at TNC, and we worked with companies. That was our group's job, was to do that, and we worked with big ones in the food and ag space. You basically have some of the smartest people you'll ever meet bringing a very different perspective to the same challenge of, be it, we did quite a bit of work on, beef and grazing and things of that nature, right? What's a sustainable roadmap for beef production in the U.S.? And that's where you get the perspectives from a scientific lens that would say, actually there are benefits to having cattle graze the Great Plains and in the northern plains of the United States, because it actually has a beneficial cycle to biodiversity. It protects it values grasslands, right, which have enormous benefits that aren't even really quantified adequately today. Now, that perspective isn't going to come from industry or necessarily from some other quarter, but it comes from NGOs, and they can bring empirical data, science, and smarts to problems that don't make sense for a company like Campbell or somebody else to try to figure out themselves.
That's really helpful. That's a great insight there. You just mentioned biodiversity. We mentioned earlier, you in your introduction, you covered a handful of different things that you have commitments on. Is there anything specific related to animal welfare that is a big thing that's on the radar of you and your colleagues at Campbell's?
Well, we have a few animal welfare goals. We have a gestation crate-free pork commitment that we met. We have and so we're sourcing under that methodology. We have we buy chicken meat. So coming back to like chicken noodle soup and the rest from chickens that are raised in environments that have litter and enrichments, so in improved welfare environments. We have a cage-free egg goal that we're working towards. Our Pacific Foods brand has GAP Step 2 chicken commitment. So they're putting, for their products. So we have a handful of them. And that's a topic that we've been working on for quite a while. And it's a topic that has, as everybody in this value chain well knows, quite a number of external parties that are actively engaged in promoting, changes to the business, improved welfare across a variety of different metrics. We're evaluated on that by independent entities, be it NGOs or be it consortia from the financial community, things like that, and by independent ratings. So it's a topic that, if you're in the food business and you deal in products that have animal protein or animal ingredients, it's something you have to deal with for sure. We sell a lot of products that have no meat, just vegetable soup as opposed to chicken noodle. But it's something that we have to grapple with for sure.
When I started in this role, and I've been active with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, and interestingly had a lot of background in looking at things like carbon and emissions and whatnot. But hear from a lot of the companies in that group that if you're forced to pick only one thing that you hear the most about, whether it's from the consumers or NGOs, it's actually animal welfare today more so than some of the other environmental commitments. And I didn't know if you also felt that too, whether the pressure from investors or NGOs or whatnot upon you, or like you said, the independent third parties.
It kind of depends upon month it is, I guess, but there's a lot of attention and increasing, regulatory action on climate and emissions, on packaging. I think if you look at some of the research and you ask generally consumers, well, what do you associate with sustainability? Packaging is top of the list. So I kind of put that in the same bucket as waste, of non-recyclability, et cetera. Animal welfare, clearly, as I mentioned, there's a large constituency of groups, and I think that does resonate with consumers at different levels. But, so does nutrition. So does environment, let's say biodiversity, preservation, restoration of nature. So a lot of these things it would be difficult maybe at any given moment to say, well, there's one that consistently rises above the rest. But with different groups, it tends to vary. And so when I came back, what I originally said at the beginning of our discussion, which is, are we focusing on topics that are relevant? Do we think we're focused on the right topics for a food company? I think we are, and it's not a huge list, but it's a list that are all quite important.
Again, this audience is heavily concentrated in people involved in raising animal agriculture. Are there any kind of just general either messages you would like to send this community, or what are the things that people that sit in your chair wish you knew more about related to what's going on back in the animal? The animal barns or in the feed mills?
I'd like to know a lot more than I do. I think what's been one of the most rewarding for me personally elements of this job, of this career sustainability, and especially in our industry, is that there is so much to learn, and it's so complex, and it's connected to so many different elements of life that broadly speaking, be it social, political, economic, cultural, environmental, scientific, that it's kind of an endless learning journey. So there's a lot I'd like to know about the space. I think there's a tremendous amount of work that's been done in the dairy space through those groups about sets of practices that can be done on both the dairy side and also the feed input side. So we're obviously excited about anything that can come out of the industry that could be beneficial to the whole value chain in terms of our collective footprint. To me, I think the message that I hope maybe comes across in this conversation is that all of this is important to us down at the other end of the value chain. And I know it's hard to connect all those dots. We've all been working on that for a long time, and it can be challenging at certain moments. But the import, the level of attention, the level of interest is growing. And I think what used to be more kind of anecdotal many years ago, where we were, there was a challenge and we're working on it, or here's a project we're working on. It's far more institutionalized now. I mean, these things are embedded into governance, they're embedded into goals, they're embedded into the way companies are managed. They're far more embedded into the investment community, broadly speaking. The NGO world has only grown in the last 2 decades, right? I mean, they're far more organized, far more attuned to how to work with the market than they used to be. So this has become an institutionalized thing. So I guess what the message I'd like to convey is that I think there's a lot of potential here for value creation. And I think about ag being quite uniquely positioned as the stewards of true environmental systems, environmental assets, and that if there's potential to have those valued differently than they are today, that means there's more value creation opportunity. And so I hope that we can all, capture that, and that the systems we develop are efficient enough, that the standards and science point in a constructive way towards solutions, that it makes sense at all the different points it has to. And so I'm hopeful. And I hope that there's additional opportunities to kind of partner on that.
That's a great message. And it's one that I sense and I sometimes try to articulate, but it means a lot more coming from somebody that actually is putting products in consumers' shopping carts too, right? That there is this opportunity to get back and value what's happening at the farm. I do get a sense that a lot of times there are people that think that what's happening at the farm is actually not transparent enough. And not because there's actually suspicion or something to be discovered that is going to be a negative about what's happening back at the animal farm. But to the contrary, farmers have a lot of credibility, and actually having more information and more connection to what they do is something that companies like you will value. They want to associate your family of brands more to the farms where the things come from.
Again, to be clear, you see data that talk to where consumers want to go, the values they want to express in their purchases, and then what happens at the cash register. There are gaps. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to overemphasize things or emphasize things incorrectly. But take it back to the B2B side. I think there is. I mean, we have more and more conversations with customers. When I say we, I mean the sustainability team about the supply chain and what things are happening in there, and how can you what is the connection to the farmer, and how can we tell those stories? How can we substantiate those data, right? I think that level of awareness, I think that's an indicator of the level of awareness and the level of interest from society writ large in seeing more sustainable agricultural practices or evidence of said existing sustainable agricultural practices told. And so we have some, direct supply chains that I think that's something we think a lot about. How can we make sure that this connectivity we have to the farmer comes to life? and can celebrate what they're doing. And also, some of the ways that as we can evolve all this to point out and say, look, this is, we're not just doing good, we're actually restoring. We're actually, there are more data to show you this. There are more opportunities to both substantiate, but also bring to life.
Great. One more question on this part. I had in a previous podcast a conversation with a consultant from Bain who does a lot of work in the food and ag space. And he said that he thinks there's sometimes a misconception that either products have to have, there's just nothing, like zero sustainability attributes towards them, or it has to go all the way to the nth degree at the other end of being the absolute full suite of any possible green, eco-friendly, animal-friendly, whatever kind of thing you have to do. And in fact, that there's a lot of space for something to be done in between. And what people really need to understand is that stuff has to be done at scale at the end of the day. Like it's just, certain things that consumers are never really going to know the level of detail. They need to be confident that things are done, though, that are making progress, and it's got to be something that can scale. I think you and I have talked about that a little bit before. Is that something that you see as well from where you sit? At the end of the day, there's a lot of solutions out there, but if they're not something that's practical or it can't be done at scale or is really going to impair the efficiency of the supply chain, then it's something at the end of the day, you're not going to try and drive among your suppliers or within your value chain. Is that right?
Ideas have to survive contact with the marketplace, right? And look, they can survive in the sense of being, geared towards a smaller batch or a niche or a, high premium product. That can work, right? I mean, there's examples of that. But if you're in the business of larger, kind of general market scale brands and products, things have to be scalable and things have to be efficient. And that's why I kind of come back to that idea that if we have the right standards in place, the right measurement, if we're focused on the right things and not trying to do everything. And I think that was maybe a little bit some of the weaknesses of earlier attempts at certification and others, where the standards were written and it became a little bit like a Christmas tree. They were hanging ornaments all over it because it was an effort in gathering support from a variety of different constituencies, each of which had certain important elements, none of which were not important. But when you put them all together, it becomes quite a weighty thing, and you kind of end up having something that's way over on the the right side of the supply curve. It's the higher cost stuff, and so I think focusing on the elements that are important. And to your point, does it have to be all the way? Well, I think that if you can make the case that this ingredient or this element of the product is really where the important impacts are, and we're improving that, then that's a pretty powerful message.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure.
Any other things that we didn't cover today that you wanted to mention?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I don't get as much opportunity to speak either directly or through a podcast to this part of the industry. And again, my comments are made with a high degree of humility because there's a lot of elements of the production, animal ag side of the world that it's not where I grew up. So
Sure.
I hope that these perspectives are I'm sharing them with humility, and I hope they're helpful.
Well, thanks very much for sharing your time too. We very much appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks again, Stewart. All right. Bye-bye.
Take care, man.